Hello everyone, this is Eric Kiska from the Firelake Media channel, and today we are talking with fellow historian, traveler, Michigan lover, and writer Aaron Helman, who's recently written the book, The Turtle, the Mitten, and an Epic History of Michigan. How's it going, Aaron?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's just start out here. What made you decide to write this book?
I'm a history writer, and I love Michigan. I mean, that's the shortest possible answer I can give. But as a historian, I like finding stories that haven't been super well told, and Michigan's full of them. But Michigan's also got this really, really consequential history. Places where the story of Michigan really intersects and helps shape the story of the United States or even the whole world. And so these moments that you find, it's really, really great to find a moment that you can see that echoes today in places still far away. Michigan's full of them.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, the more and more videos I do, I figure out there's all these little stories that, they've been told a few times, but then I go back in the newspapers and I find all this crazy history and facts about all these stories that have been told before. That it's just insane how much little history there is around Michigan, for sure.
And it's a treasure hunt to find it. That's what makes it exciting.
Yes, definitely. Well, today we're going to talk about a specific chapter from your book, because this one just jumped right off the page to me when I just read the title, and then I read the excerpt too, or I read that chapter specifically, the Union Pier Nudist Club, because I like strange and weird history, and especially strange and weird history from Michigan. So, Aaron, what was the Union Pier Nudist Club?
This is such a terrific story because it is that weird and interesting story. But as we'll find out, it's also got this super consequential piece that really influenced American history, American culture. So we have to back up just a little bit before we get into Union Pier, though. We got to go to New Buffalo because New Buffalo was the biggest Chicago playground in the early 1900s. That was the first town. If you drive from Chicago, it's the first Michigan town you hit. And it's even today, there's this stark difference between New Buffalo and everything that you drove through to get to New Buffalo. And so in the early part of the 1900s, that was where all the Chicago people wanted to go for vacation. But New Buffalo was pretty buttoned up, pretty proper. So that was where you went if you had a proper job, if you had a family, if you were a normal person. And if you were a part of the underground culture or the counterculture, which was huge in Chicago, New Buffalo wasn't the place for you. So there was a whole collection of Chicago. They called themselves bohemians, but we might call them hippies or counterculturalists, whatever you want to call them. And when they would go on vacation, they got on the same train, but they stayed on one more stop, traveled past New Buffalo, got off at Union Pier. In the 1910s, Union Pier was a very small community. It really still is a very small community, but it was like this hardworking Lithuanian community. People worked really hard and didn't have much time to go to the beach. And it worked out because these counterculturalists from Chicago were more than happy to go to the beach for them. So this group that came from Chicago was part of a group called the Jackson Art Colony. And I describe them in the book as hypothetical artists. Like, they were the kinds of people who called themselves artists, talked about what they wanted to do, but hadn't done anything yet. They were debaters, but they weren't writers. They wanted to be writers, but they hadn't become writers yet. So they're all in their 20s, and they start going to Union Pier for their vacations. And when they get to Union Pier, the party is on. So you're thinking lots of drinking, lots of booze, early drugs, but the most important feature of their vacations was no clothes. So they would get to the beach and it would just be naked time on the beach, naked time in the water. And for the most part, the Lithuanians who worked in town were okay with it as long as what happened out on the beach stayed on the beach. And as we'll learn in a little bit, it didn't always stay that way.
Were they actually nudists, or were they just felt like taking their clothes off? Or because nudists are a specific type of people that believe I should be able to be nude wherever I want. But were they just felt like taking their clothes off, I'm guessing, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. They were only nudists at Union Pier.
Okay.
It was very selective nudism. I have to imagine, without knowing, but I have to imagine that it started with a drunken dare and some skinny dipping, and from there just kind of became their thing to the point where the Lithuanian community in town gave them the name the Union Pier Nudist Club,
Okay.
and it stuck, and they liked it. Like, they thought, okay, that's a good name. That's what we are now.
Yeah. And so Bohemians, I guess, like, this was before, obviously, way before Jack Kerouac, before the Beatniks, but, I mean, there was this kind of counterculture, I guess, around Chicago. What was that like? I mean, like, what were counterculturists back then? Were they, like, socialists, communists, or were they just, I don't know, just strange artists?
Mostly just strange artists.
Okay.
So, one of the guys was a guy named Bashir Lindsay, and he had spent years walking around the country trading poetry for food. So he would come to your house and knock on your door and say, "If I read you a poem, will you give me a sandwich?" And apparently this worked for him because he was fairly successful with it. Some of the others were sculptors, poets. But again, in the years before they started coming, they were more hypothetical sculptors and poets.
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't producing, they weren't publishing, they were just talking about a lot of good ideas, rejecting the mainstream culture, but not yet to the point where they were ready to offer an alternative. They really just wanted to criticize what was there. When they come out of the water at Union Pier, that's when everything changes and they become super prolific.
Yeah. So what were they doing besides just skinny dipping at Union Pier? Do you think they were actually, like, you know, debating, having conversations about art? What exactly were they doing in Union Pier?
So we know from very limited records and diaries and biographies that have been written about some of these people that they swam and they slept and they drank and they made fires and they talked about philosophy and they talked about art. And they may have said to themselves around those fires or in that water, like, we need to actually do something. You know, we can't just keep complaining. And we don't know that they said that or not. But again, that's exactly what happens next.
And also, so you said Lithuanians lived in Union Pier back then. So, but the west side of Michigan is very much known for the Dutch. How did the Lithuanians find Union Pier?
You know, I really don't know the answer to that. I don't know. The train that would have come through, the last stop was in New Buffalo. And then at New Buffalo, this was in the late 1800s, the train didn't continue to Chicago. So New Buffalo began as a tourist community in the 1890s because the train stopped there and then you had to get on a boat. And if those two things didn't line up, weren't timed well, then you just had to wait in New Buffalo, or you had to wait till the next day, or if there was bad weather. So that was the explosion of New Buffalo. So some of these immigrant communities kind of come out that way, and maybe New Buffalo's full, so we back it off a stop, and this is a place where we can build something that's our own and have this quiet space for our little community, never knowing that it is soon going to be invaded by nude Chicago artists.
So, I guess I won't, I won't ruin the lead here. What ended up happening to this nudist club?
Well, what ended up happening was they flew a little too close to the sun. So, in 1913 and 1914 was the heyday of the Union Pier Nudist Club, and then it got a little too big for its own good. And a few of the more attractive women in the club, who again were naked, managed to seduce away a few married Lithuanian men in the community, and the people who lived in Union Pier finally said enough is enough, and they put a stop to it. So this was a really brief, shining, exciting, interesting moment in Michigan's history that only lasts 2 or 3 years before it gets shut down. But the really important stuff is what we'll talk about next, and that's what they did once they put their pants back on.
For sure. And when you say it got shut down, did they just, like, basically go up to him and tell him, like, you can't come back here anymore, like, this is ridiculous, like, you can't do this, like, is that what happened, or?
Yes, that is exactly what happened. They told them they couldn't come back. They weren't going to sell to them anymore. So, I mean, even when they were
Wow.
nudists, they had to go in town and buy stuff, and someone had to put clothes on to go to the store. But they said, "All right, you're not getting stuff from us anymore. This is done." And so it was done.
Okay, for sure. And so, who were some of the people in this nudist club? And I guess you might as well combine that with what did they go on to do?
Sure. So the biggest figure in the club, the captain of the club, as it were, was a guy named Sherwood Anderson. And most people today don't know the name Sherwood Anderson. His literary legacy is not necessarily held up. You don't read him in school today, but at his time he was incredibly influential. He published I think 41 books. Just hugely prolific writer, and was an early influence for Ernest Hemingway. So while we don't necessarily know him or read him as part of the Western canon, he had a big part in shaping it. So he's a real major figure. There's some other lesser figures, some poets, some sculptors, some literary reviews, but far and away the most famous and most important individual to come out of the Union Pier Nudist Club was a guy named Ben Hecht. Ben Hecht was a Chicagoan who had a rough upbringing, which is how he got involved with this counterculture to begin with. Started coming to Union Pier and taking his clothes off and swimming in Lake Michigan. And when it was all over, he started publishing. He wrote a bunch of books, but mostly he wrote early scripts for plays. And then as movies became the dominant force, he became a very major screenwriter. He won 2 Academy Awards. He wrote the original Scarface, which I was shocked to learn that there was an original Scarface back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
He wrote the original A Star is Born, the one that Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga remade a couple years ago. At the time of his death, he was working on the script for what was supposed to be the first James Bond film. As a writer, he ghost wrote Marilyn Monroe's autobiography. But the thing that he is most known for is that they called him the Shakespeare of Hollywood. That was his nickname. That's what other movie people called him.
Yeah.
Which is basically the highest compliment you could give someone, especially in 1920 when Shakespeare still carried an awful lot of weight. And the movie Gone with the Wind was being filmed, and it was hot garbage, according to the people making it. It was not going well. It needed to be fixed. And it had such big stars and such expensive sets that they were hemorrhaging money. And the fear was that Gone with the Wind was going to be a massive flop, possibly the greatest and most expensive failure in movie history. So they called Ben Hecht and said, "You've got to come out here and help us rewrite this movie." And he said, "I don't know if I can do that. Give me a week to read the book." And they said, "You don't have a week. Get out here and rewrite this." So he rewrites all of the dialogue in Gone with the Wind without having read the book. He described it as living off of coffee, bananas, and salted peanuts for a week at a typewriter while he just pounded out new page after new page after new page and sent it along to be filmed. And at the end of the week, he effectively rewrote the entirety of the film Gone with the Wind in like 6 or 7 days. And of course, the rest is history. It did not go on to be a great flop. We do not know it as the greatest failure in American cinema. And Ben Hecht holds most of the responsibility for that, especially according to his contemporaries at the time.
Wow.
It's not a bad haul for a guy who used to swim naked in Lake Michigan at Union Pier.
Yeah. And then also I think I read that he added, so in the book it was just Scarlet, I don't give a damn. Did he add frankly Scarlet, I don't give a damn?
That's
right?
Exactly right.
Wow.
He added the word frankly, which is, it's such this small thing, but maybe the most iconic film line of all time. I mean, that's right up there with "I am your father" or any of these other great movie quotes. That's the original iconic movie quote. That's his.
Yes. That's amazing. And then he won 2 Academy Awards too, right? I think
Yes, he won 2 Academy Awards. He's in the National American Cinema Hall of Fame, and we don't necessarily know his name today, but if you think that Gone with the Wind is an influential film, and you should, his fingerprints are still all over what we know as American movies today. And what you got to remember is when he was around, cinema wasn't quite a defined thing yet. It was still figuring out what it was going to be, and he helped define what a movie was supposed to be, and the movies that we watch today are still fitting into that mold that he helped create.
Yeah. So I guess going back to Union Pier, do you think the waters of Lake Michigan really provided this kind of muse for these people?
I think so. In the book, I talk about how, the Chicago that they lived in was loud and chaotic and noisy.
Meatpacking time, right?
Yeah. And they absolutely needed all of that frenetic energy to inform what they were going to be. But they also needed this other quiet, serene thing. And especially in Sherwood Anderson's books, which, again, we don't read a lot of them, but whether he intends to or not, his books really waffle back and forth between crazy, frenetic chaos and then these moments of still reflection, which I believe harkens right back to what he discovered in the water at Lake Michigan at Union Pier.
Yeah. And how old were they all at this time? Like early 20s or?
Early 20s, late teens.
Yeah.
That was the time to be doing that kind of thing, yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So 2 years, and then they went on to actually have careers when they didn't really have careers to speak of before. Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I guess tell me a little bit about your experience while you were writing, just going around that area. What was it like,
I ride my bike in southwest Michigan all the time. So from my house where I live, it's a 35-mile bike ride to Union Pier. There's a coffee shop there. We go there, we get coffee, we get a bagel, we ride back home. So I'm up there all the time. It is some of the most fun places to ride a bike. And so when we go up there, we're always exploring, always finding something new. That's where part of Michigan's celebrated wine country is. So we get to ride the hills and the vineyards and then eventually come out to the water. It's a magical place. The whole state of Michigan, almost without exception, is a magical place. But there's something special in my heart for that part of southwest Michigan especially.
Very cool. And so, you decide to write this book. You start traveling around. Do you got any fun stories or, kind of bohemian type stories even from your travels through Michigan, or?
So I spent 2 years researching this book because I knew we were going to make the trip, which I write about in the book, and I didn't want to miss anything, right? I didn't want to do this whole trip and then come back and find out that I missed something really amazing by a mile and a half, and now I have to do this all over again. And even with 2 years of research, there's so much that surprised me about this trip. I mentioned that there is a replica of William Shakespeare's childhood home in southwest Michigan. I didn't know it was there. I was riding my bike past it, and I looked at it, and I was like, that building looks weird and old and like it's from a different country. And then I looked it up that night, and I'm just, freaking out because I'm like, oh, yeah, no, that was just Shakespeare's house, because, of course, it was. But one of my favorite unexpected stories was from Harbert, Michigan. Harbert it's not a town, it's a community just north of Union Pier, actually. It's dirt roads, it's just lake houses, but old lake houses, and a very old lake community. It doesn't have any of the trappings of what we think of now as a tourist town, right? There's no little bars, there's no little coffee shops, there's nowhere selling novelty t-shirts. It's just this collection of houses and a private beach and an old barn that used to be the dance hall. So I was there talking with someone who owned a home, and he was telling me about, there used to be a casino over there, and that house over there is where they kept the booze during Prohibition. And then he points to this house right across the dirt road and says, do you see that house over there? And I did. I saw it. So I said, yes. And he said, that was Carl Sandburg's lake house in the summers. That's where he came in the summers. He was from Chicago, and that's where he wrote Lincoln, and he won a Nobel Prize for writing Lincoln on the second floor balcony of his lake house in Harbert, Michigan. So I'm talking to this guy and I'm just blown away, right? Like it's right there. And he goes, when I first started coming here, there were people still who remembered him and they hated that guy. And I said, they hated Carl Sandburg? And he said, yeah, they hated him. And I said, why did they hate Carl Sandburg? And he said, because every morning he would wake up and he would get his coffee and he would go sit on his balcony and write Lincoln. And do you know what he was doing every time he was writing Lincoln? And in the back of my head, I felt like I knew what he was going to say, but then he said it anyway. He was completely naked. That was just his thing. He sat naked on the balcony and wrote, and they gave him a Nobel Prize for it. And maybe it's worth a shot. I don't know. Maybe I'll try it someday.
Yeah. I guess there's just some kind of history here with being naked and writing in southwestern Michigan. That's
a magical place for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So yeah, your book is called The Turtle, the Mitten, and an Epic History of Michigan. Is there anything else you want to say about the book?
I fit into this genre that's not fully established, but I've been calling it part adventure, part history, part travel, and 100% pure Michigan. And that feels like a pretty good slogan. And people ought to be able to find it in their local bookstore if they're across Michigan. As we're recording this, I just got an email today that it's the #1 paperback nonfiction book among independent booksellers in the state of Michigan.
Good for you.
I have no idea. I have no idea how many copies that is, but it should be around. And if you can't find it at your local bookstore, it's at my website, aaronhelman.com.
Yep. And I got it on Kindle too. So if anybody reads, through Kindle, I got it there too. So
yeah, Kindle. There's an audiobook. It's out there, and I hope people read it because Michigan has a fascinating but also really, really important history, and it's worth knowing, and it's definitely a lot of fun.
And this is your, 6th book I think I saw on your website, or?
Yeah, it is. It is. So this is my, I've got 2 novels out, floating around out there somewhere, and then 2 local history books to my part of Indiana. And this is the most ambitious thing I've written yet, but.
Yeah. Are you planning anything next, or are you just
That's a great
enjoying
question.
what you? Yeah.
This is the first time in a long time that I don't have my next project lined up. Okay. I have learned that the best way to get new ideas is to write a book, because then people will tell you everything that they think you should have written about. Mm-hmm. So I'm already getting the emails, hey, I loved your book. I can't believe you didn't mention blank. And when they tell me that, I'm just telling myself they're writing the next table of contents for me. So we'll see what comes next.
There's so much history in Michigan, it's impossible to put into one book unless you want to write 5,000 page encyclopedia or something, so.
And then no one will read it.
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing I'm most excited about right now would be actually a novel about the old logging days in Michigan, written in the style of like a Western. Because that's pretty much what that world was, except instead of a desert, it's just a frozen forest. But that's what they were doing, and I think that's a part of history that is just so fascinating and so cool, and the echoes of it are everywhere.
All right, well, thanks for talking to me. I guess, anything else you want to plug here, or is that it?
Buy the book. Don't be a passive consumer of your own history. Go out and experience it yourself.
Yes, for sure. All right, thanks for talking to me, Aaron.
Thanks, Eric.